Madinah Institute for Leadership and Entrepreneurship, MILE.
For being patient as well. I do hope you can stay an extra half an hour with us. We are starting 30 minutes after the hour. So let me just jump right into this thing. You know, as project managers, we're always making decisions, aren't we? And every decision we make, whether it's large or small, has an impact on our project. But in most cases, we don't make decisions alone. We involve any number of people in our decision making for the simple reason is we don't have all the answers. Sometimes we think we do, but let's face it, we don't have all the answers. And as soon as we bring in other people to the decision-making process, it slows down. It slows down for any number of reasons. And it was this slowing down of decision-making that led a former client of mine, the head of global drug development at a very, very large pharmaceutical company, to seek my advice on how to speed up decision-making. So let me describe his situation to you. Drug development is done by highly credentialed scientists who love data. The more, the better. It's done in most parts of the world in a highly regulated environment where all decisions are data dependent and any mistake can cost lives and millions of dollars. And it's done in a highly risky and extremely costly environment. Let me show you what I mean. You have any idea how much time and money it takes to develop a drug? Well, according to the Tufts University Center for the Study of Drug Development, on average it takes about 11 years and $1 billion US. Just think of all the decisions that are made throughout this life cycle. It's almost impossible to count. However, if they make the right decisions in this business, and they make them in a timely manner, they might just have a blockbuster drug on their hands, which by definition, in that business, a blockbuster drug earns $1 billion a year in revenue, or $2.74 million a day. Now that's a nice day's pay. But think of it another way. Every day that that drug is not available, they're losing $2.74 million. But wait, the numbers can get even bigger. If you really have a winner on your hands like Lipitor, the numbers are astounding. At its height, Lipitor earned Pfizer in 1 year, in 2006, $13.6 billion or $37.3 million a day. Over its 14-and-a-half-year lifetime, it generated revenues for Pfizer of more than $125 billion in sales. Is it no wonder that the global head of drug development wanted to speed up decision-making? This company had millions, if not billions, at stake. So in our session today, I'll present some pragmatic and concrete ideas as to how you can make better, faster decisions. After all, the projects you manage all have their economics too. Do you know, for example, what it's costing your company right now in revenue and profits or other costs for every day you don't complete your project according to your plan? Go back and figure that one out. You might be surprised. So what does a project manager need to make better, faster decisions? I think PM needs three things. They're not the only three things, obviously, but these are critical. The first is accurate information at frequent intervals from reliable sources. One of the United States' largest insurance companies, IT group, that I was working with for a number of years, couldn't agree as to what constituted a status report. They had philosophical discussions about what should be in a status report and what shouldn't be. Another company I met in the energy sector used 12 metrics that reported status every 2 weeks. Who do you think could make better, faster decisions? Second thing I think you need is a willingness to make decisions under uncertain conditions. Do you, like the head of global drug development, work with some people who never have enough data or time to make a decision, and how frustrating that is? I bet you do. And third, a project governance structure that pushes decisions down to the lowest possible level. Militaries around the world are letting go of the old command and control structure of the past and are pushing decision-making down the ranks. I'm going to take each of these areas and go into a little bit more detail and give you some ideas to put these three notions into place. So let's begin first with accurate information. What does it really tell us? And where do we find it? After all, accurate information can really be anywhere. Well, I think accurate information tells us three things. It tells us what happened in the past. And when I say the past, I'm not referring to lessons learned from previous projects. I'm talking about the past for your current project. We spend a lot of time in the past on projects, probably more than we should. Look at it this way. Every report that lands on your desk or hits your screen is like reading a history book, isn't it? Is it recent history or is it ancient history? Some organizations, that cycle is 6 weeks old. So the key is, how old is that data and how useful is it to help us predict the future? We'll look at some examples. I think accurate information tells us about the present. Although we spend all of our waking and sleeping moments in the present, I think we give it a bit of short shrift when it comes to managing projects. It's the present, not the past, that governs our future. It's what you and your project team are doing right now that'll dictate tomorrow's results. What's your team doing right now? And it also tells us about the future. On projects, everybody's obsessed with the future, aren't they? You, your team, the client, the boss. They want to know, when will the project be done? There's a lot of anticipation. I mean, how many times have people asked you on a project, when will it be done? That's probably the question that is asked more often than any. We hedge our bets all the time. And we do so because we don't regularly employ a good to help us do the hard work of predicting the future. So that's what I think accurate information tells us. So now, where do we find it? Well, we find all this information in our project reports and dashboards that many PMs and PMOs employ, and I'm sure you're all very familiar with these kinds of things. So I won't go through all of this. I mean, just take a look at it. You get this stuff day in and day out. Burn down charts and burn up charts, by the way, are for those folks who are in the agile software development business. That's one of their key tools. So all this info is helpful. It is helpful. It tells us where we've been, but it doesn't tell us necessarily where we're headed. Not necessarily. So project reports, to me, are just the tip of the iceberg. And I know this is somewhat of an overused analogy, but you know what? It works. But I have a different perspective on this that I'm going to share with you now. You probably remember when you were young and learning about icebergs, that icebergs actually migrate, don't they? And there are two physical forces that cause icebergs to migrate: wind and currents. Which of these has the greatest impact on their movement? Well, if you answered currents, you'd be right. Why is that? Well, because there's a lot more ice under the water than there is on top of the water, so the current is going to have more of an effect. For example, many project managers complain that time and cost are problems on projects. Not really. I disagree with that. Time and cost are results. They're outcomes. They're not the causes of problems as a general rule. Time and cost are the tip of the iceberg. It's what's moving the berg, the part you don't see, where the issues are. If we see and collect information we don't like on these project reports, we can get mad, we can fire people, but one thing we can't do is change it. That's why it can be of limited use in the active management of our projects. That's why we need to focus on the present. And the present is all around us. And there are ways to find accurate information about the present. In fact, I'm going to offer you five ways to get the information you need to know about the present. Well, one way I know you can't get this information is if you stay glued to your laptop and don't get out and start talking to people. And this can be a real problem for technical people. I was a technical professional for many years myself, so I certainly relate to this. Technical people would rather deal with things rather than with people, don't they? Also, some companies require the PM to be the scheduler and or the business analyst, and they're so busy doing these other functions that they can only be the project manager on a part-time basis. This is a practice that really has got to stop. So I said I'm going to offer up 5 good ways to obtain information from the present. And I'll admit right off the bat that you have heard of all of these. But maybe in the crush of business and the pressure of your day, you let some of these things slide. Number 1 is stand-up meetings. So here's how this goes. On the first day of your work week, get your core team together. Don't let them sit down and get comfortable. People hate to stand. Their feet hurt, their backs ache. People who would usually go on and on will be so brief you won't even recognize them. And have the same format for each meeting. It's really not a discussion time. It's a briefing. Each person answers questions like, what did I do last week? What am I going to do this week? What are the major risks that I believe I'm going to be facing this week? You'll be surprised what you can find out in such a short period of time. In Agile software development, they have daily stand-up meetings. And by the way, the picture that you see here, this is the crew from NASA who was responsible for the spacecraft called the Pioneer. This was taken in 1972. The Pioneer was the first spacecraft to travel through the asteroid belt and the first spacecraft to make direct observations and obtain close-up images of Jupiter. Pioneer 10, now more than 7.5 billion miles from Earth, is the farthest spacecraft in the solar system. These guys in 1972 had stand-up meetings. Nothing new here, but it works. MBWA. This is not a master's degree in business something or other. This is management by walking around. This was popularized by Tom Peters and Bob Waterman in their 1982 bestseller. Some of you may have read this, In Search of Excellence. You might think this was old, but let me ask, do you think that talking to people will ever go out of style as a form of communication? Well, I knew it did when I read an article about the legendary A.G. Lafley, CEO of Procter & Gamble, because he gave talking to people a new name. He said it was high-touch communications, and he was encouraging his managers at P&G, at Procter & Gamble, to talk to people more, but he didn't say that. He said, you know, in business speak, he said, we need more high-touch communications. And as you do this, remember the 80-20 rule. Listen 80% and speak 20%. Listen 80% of the time and speak 20% of the time. This is not the time for you to pontificate. Only the pontiff can pontificate. Now, this may be hard if you haven't done it for a while. So have a list of questions or ask people for opinions like, you know, what are the key challenges you're facing this week? Who are you working with most of the time? How does the client like our work? You'd be surprised at the reception that you'll get. And of course, you know, it's always more difficult in a virtual environment with global teams and so forth. But look, we have all sorts of ways, as shown here, that we can reach out and touch somebody without ever seeing them face to face. So up number 3 is speaking to, as you see here, clients all the way to team members. And when I say speaking, I don't mean have regular meetings with clients, monthly reviews, milestone reviews, and so forth. I mean, that's standard operating procedure. You should be doing this, obviously. It's a best practice. What I'm talking about is having regular calls and contacts with clients and others that appear ad hoc, but they're not. That you're purposefully making informal contact with people to see how things are really going, because we all need to gauge the reaction of our stakeholders and others apart from the formal mechanisms that we put in place for communication. I worked with one of the big 5 consulting firms for a number of years, and when they went into a client, they teamed up their senior partner with the client's VP, the partner with the business unit head of the client, and PM of the consulting organization with the PM of the client. And each one of these people, the senior partner, once a month would take somebody to a nice dinner or golfing or to some event. The partner would have lunch. The PM would have, you know, all in the way of obtaining informally information about what's really going on. And look, you don't have to have big bank accounts to do this. You don't have to take someone out for an artery-clogging steak dinner. You know, you can buy them a nice cup of coffee from time to time. It works wonders when you do it informally. We all hear about networking, obviously, and it comes in many forms. I'm not suggesting that you turn every one of life's events into a networking function, but, you know, we should be bringing our team together. We should be inviting our users or our clients. We should be talking to our peers about what they may be hearing about how things are going. Networking with managers of people on your team, because you're in a matrix environment, your functional managers are providing these resources to us. Obviously, there's a whole area of social networking here that can play into this, and that can be very helpful as well. So a combination of live face-to-face type networking as well as perhaps some social networking that organizations do can be very, very helpful. I mean, think of it this way. It's all about business intelligence, isn't it? You, as a project manager, as a leader, you don't want to be the last to know if something isn't going well. And remember, never eat alone like this poor guy over here in the corner, which, by the way, is the title of a really, really interesting and fun read by a guy by the name of Keith Ferrazzi called Never Eat Alone. Highly successful PMs, managers, and executives are constantly engaging their peers, constantly engaging their colleagues and clients to make sure the project is going to move along well. And by doing all of this, they are staying in the zone, so to speak, because they want to know where their iceberg is headed, and you do too. Now, let's talk about the future. If we have accurate information about the past and the present, this will certainly improve our ability to predict the future. And predicting the future is tough business. But here are some ways that I have used and that have been passed along to me by others that work actually pretty well. One way is to practice relentless risk analysis, as I call it. Build risk management into your MBWA. So when you're asking questions, the majority of them are about the future. Like what risks are we facing here? What could happen? How likely is it to happen? What's our impact? If you do this constantly, you will get your team to always start thinking about the future, and you're building in a very, very strong culture of risk. There are a lot of tools and techniques that are available, from strategy meetings to the Delphi technique, highly quantified techniques such as Monte Carlo analysis, and earned value management. That's a whole other system, so to speak, which takes information about the past, and depending upon how you see the future, you can have some sense of where the project is headed. So EVM is something that is used. It's not used a lot by many organizations, but certainly those that use it find it certainly extremely valuable. How about this as an idea for you? And that is to think about what your project leading indicators are. Project reports, the stuff you get in project reports, those are lagging indicators, aren't they? What are your leading indicators? In the United States, for example, and in other countries, economists use what's called an index of leading economic indicators to try to figure out where the economy is going. In the U.S., we have 10 that are used. One of the 10 is called the Consumer Confidence Index, and that measures on a monthly basis consumer expectations, how good they feel about spending their money. That's important in the United States because our GDP, 70% of the U.S.'s GDP is driven by consumer spending. It's me buying a laptop, a big screen TV, washing machines, dryers, new cars. 70% of our GDP is based on consumer spending. So economists want to know how people feel about the economy. So they collect this information on a monthly basis along with 9 others to try to predict where things are headed. Now, how about this as an idea for you? A stakeholder confidence index. Ask your key stakeholders on a regular basis how it's going. While you may judge progress and performance on time, cost, and scope, chances are your stakeholders are measuring you not only in those ways, but in other ways as well. And you need to know what they're thinking. And you need to collect this information at frequent intervals on a regular and frequent basis, because this instills a discipline in your management and control system, and regularity enables you to look at trends. And if you look at these trends, you'll be able to make faster decisions if you understand the trends of the data. Years ago, I went into Johns Hopkins University for a physical. Johns Hopkins University is very, very, very well known in the United States. It's a premier medical institution. And they provided physicals, not for free, believe me, not for free. So I said, okay, I'll go to Johns Hopkins. My wife said, you need to go there and get yourself checked out. I went in there for an entire day. I went through, as they say, a battery of tests. When I was done, I sat down with the lead physician, and he says, everything looks good except this one number here. I won't bore you with all the details. He said, but you know what? He said, that's just one data point. I don't have numbers before this, and we need to collect numbers after this. This number here is an interesting number. That could be just you. That could be maybe something's wrong. He said, I really don't know. So we really need to start collecting this number more frequently, because then I'll be able to see the trends. Well, your project reports are the same way. Here's what one client did that I worked with to establish a leading indicator. They looked at the number of tasks that were added in the past 2 weeks to their network schedule, thinking that the more tasks that were added, the higher the risk the project was of not getting done on time. Pretty cool, I thought. And you need to get all this stuff from reliable sources. You need to make sure that the people that are reporting to you, that they're doing so fairly and honestly. It does you no good whatsoever to have your team or stakeholders, fudge the numbers, or exaggerate them in a positive way. You want the unvarnished truth, as they say. So, what is the key to honest reporting? Well, I think the answer is simple. We don't punish people if they bring us bad news. If you do this, you won't get the truth. Self-control, we need to have good self-control and address any problems objectively and not become emotional about it and yelling and screaming at people, because you'll never get the truth in that point. They just won't tell you. So we spent the last few minutes talking about information collection. There's a lot of information around us, and there has to be a way to filter it down to a more manageable level. And one of the things that I alluded to here was the kind of information that we should be looking for. We need the nuggets. We need the vital signs, those metrics that really tell us what's going on in our project. I mentioned leading indicators as one way to do it. Another thought I have, it's about quality of the information, not the quantity of the information. But project metrics is really beyond the scope of what I'm talking about here, but I just want to pass along one thought to you that occurred to me as I was preparing for this just last week, actually, or it was about, about a week and a half ago. I just celebrated a birthday a couple of weeks ago, and it was, by U.S. standards anyway, somewhat of a milestone. I won't bore you with the details. And my wife got me this card. And I opened it up and I read it and I said to her, "Gee, thanks, that's a great card." But she knew I didn't get it. She said, read it again, LeRoy. You see, it made sense on its face. Birthdays are good for you. Statistics show that people who have the most live the longest. Okay, well, that's a true statement. Well, when she told me to read it again, and I did, then I got it. I just burst out laughing. Because what this says is true, but it's worthless. It's just totally worthless. And I thought, well, gee, I have seen project reports that have a lot of information, but they're kind of worthless. So I just thought I'd pass that along for you to sort of ask yourself, are your project reports the same as this card, or are you getting some data that's factual but not very helpful? You might be. We can have all this information from reliable sources, but some people struggle to make decisions. They do. So if you're working with someone who's struggling to make a decision because, they just don't have enough data, and they're struggling, and, if I make the wrong decision, I'll get fired, I'll be humiliated. Here's some ideas to try to help that person overcome this problem. And it is a problem. United States Marine Corps, USMC, has what they call the 70% solution. I just love this. You think about the Marine Corps and any military person, any war fighter, they're in a critical situation. They're in a situation where doing something may be better than doing nothing. The idea here is you'll never have 100% of all the information you need. Chances are you never will. But if you have 70%, well, heck, that's good enough. Go with it. Here's some ideas that I have. Ask yourself these questions. Is it better to do something or nothing? This could be a tough one, but it's a good question to ponder. How bad can it be if I make a decision? Will I get fired if it doesn't work? And I think what's critical is, what's my track record? A lot of people make decisions. CEOs make decisions day in and day out, but their track record is better than 500%, let's say. So if you have a good track record, then you have to go with the stats on that, I think. And by all means, use your network. Get out and see what other people think. If you're convening a meeting, for example, to ask people what their opinions are on a particular problematic issue, don't waste time on endless conversations, because people will waste a lot of time on endless conversations, and everybody has not just one opinion but 5. Do what is called a Crawford slip technique to get a lot of information from people without them actually talking. I don't have time to go into the Crawford slip technique. It's been around since the late 20s, by the way. You can Google it, Crawford, C-R-A-W-F-O-R-D, slip technique. It's brainstorming without people talking. That, to me, is heaven. But even when people do all of these things, they still struggle. So what do? Well, hopefully you wouldn't resort to soothsayers, palm readers, energy healing, and aura analysis to help you make a decision regarding the project. So I have a few more tips for those who struggle. The first is I've developed this decision framework, and I've developed this based on 3 books that I read. There's a lot of information, plenty of research that's been done through the years on decision making. And as you can see, I have 3 references of very well-known and respected thinkers in the field at the bottom of the slide here. I read all of these, and I noted the best approach to decision-making from each one, and I developed this 4-step decision-making framework, which you see here, and I'm just going to go through very briefly, which I use, and on my teams through the years I have used, and I've used it to great effect. So the first step is, first of all, we want to define the problem correctly. Are you certain you have articulated the right problem to solve? Let me ask you this. How many of you have been in a meeting, been called into a meeting, or maybe you called the meeting because there's a problem? Everybody sort of knows what the problem is, so then they know why they're there. And the meeting kicks off, and people just start talking, and they're just talking. And there's a lot of conversation going on, debates going back and forth. And finally, after about 15 or 20 minutes, someone raises their hand, usually someone who hasn't been saying a lot, and they'll say, what problem are we trying to solve here? How many of you have been in meetings like that? I've been in plenty of meetings like that. We all jump in quickly because we're project managers and want to solve things. That's what we do for a living. We're problem solvers. So we want to jump to solve that problem as fast as possible, but we might be solving the wrong problem. So make sure you define the problem correctly. Then frame the decision. Now this is an interesting one that I hadn't thought of until I read these 3 books. Because framing the decision means you're going to ask who's impacted by the decision. Who needs to provide input to the decision? Who should be part of the discussion? Who should make and review the decision? It kind of contextualizes decision making a bit. The third area is to implement the decision. Who needs to know about it? Can the people identified who are supposed to implement the decision, can they actually do it? And then finally, once we implement our decision, then we monitor it because we want to make sure that our decision has had the intended impact. If we think about decision making more along these lines, then it's just not about making that one key decision. We're looking at it more in the environment of the decision that in fact we need to make. And in doing that, and in bringing some people into our meetings and our discussions can be quite helpful in helping someone who can be uncertain about making a decision. But some people, even after all of this, great advice, if I do say so myself, they continue to struggle and they lose the fight. They just can't seem to make the decisions quickly. So sadly, if you're left with, and I think at this point you're left with only one alternative, you've got to move that person out of a decision-making role. Okay, so let me hit pause here and see where we are. I talked about accurate information and frequent intervals from reliable sources. We looked at willingness to make decisions under uncertain conditions. And now let's go into the last one here, which I think has an amazing impact on decision-making, a project governance structure that pushes decisions down to the lowest possible level. You know, the sort of the sad fact of life in a way is that we all have bosses. And we have some structure in which we do our job. And it's this structure and how it's implemented that can help or hinder our ability to make better, faster decisions. So think of it this way. As a project manager or as a manager or leader, you work in an environment that's created above you, some structure of decision making that's created above you. But you, in turn, also have the leeway and latitude to create a decision-making structure below you. That decision-making structure below you can be complementary to the one above you, or it can be radically different. It really depends on how you want to do it. So what I'd like you to do for just a couple of seconds is I want you to think of the current governance structure under which you work. Let's think about that for a second. And if you had to describe it, would it look like this? Obviously, I'm kidding, but many organizations actually struggle with this. Every time we use the word governance, many project managers think of their process and what they need to go through to get decisions made. Many PMs through the years have told me they are made to feel as if they're on trial almost. So I think executives need to ask themselves the questions, how onerous is the decision-making process and the governance structure? Because the governance structure is all about decision-making, isn't it? How onerous is the governance structure that they have put into place? And also, as a project manager, do you make your team members feel like this too? This is where you can create a structure that's different from the one on top of you, which I have done in the past. It's kind of interesting how that works. So when we think about decision making, I'm going to refer to a book that was written quite a few years ago now, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. It was written by a guy by the name of Tom Friedman, and he's a foreign correspondent for the New York Times, and he wrote a book called The World is Flat. Perhaps some of you have read this. And so that's what I'm referring to when I say it's a flatter world out there. And it really is a flatter world out there. Friedman identified 10 things that are fostering globalization and putting countries on an even playing field. And I took from that book an idea that he spoke of when he was talking about militaries, not just U.S. military, but militaries. You can see that I've represented several here on this particular chart, where commanders, generals, battlefield commanders and so forth, are putting into place something called the commander's intent. So the commander's intent is described to the team. This is what we want to do. We want to take that hill, let's say. I want to take that hill. Now the warfighters go on out to take the hill, and even though the commander, sitting somewhere remotely, can look at everything that's going on because of all this technology that you see here, the commander is allowing the warfighters to actually make the key decisions about how to take that hill, because why? They're there on the ground. That doesn't mean that they make all the decisions, because sometimes a broader perspective remotely is going to be more helpful. But the idea here is that the commander doesn't know everything, and that the warfighter has access to the same level of data and information that the commander has. Look at this guy here, for example. He's a walking antenna. I mean, this guy's a human network. He is directly connected to the data sources that are going to save his life. It's truly a digital battlefield. So commander's intent. So what's the point of all of this? Well, I think it creates an opportunity for us to think about our own governance structures, whether it's above us or below us, and how we can take this concept and apply it in our work. So think with me, if you would, the governance structure that you have created for your team. Not the one above you, excuse me, but the one that you've created for your team. I want to ask some questions. What's your governance structure? Do you let team members make decisions? Are they connected to the data source? Do they have access to all the information that you have access to? Well, chances are, if you're running a fairly sophisticated project, they will. You might be using some pretty powerful PPM software that everybody can access, and they can see everything. Everyone can see everything all the time because everything is transparent and it's online. And allowing team members to make decisions, or are you the type of project manager that is more of a command and control kind of a person? That works. I'm not against that, because certainly it works. It can work. And in certain circumstances, you have to be that way. But more and more, we're allowing team members to make their own decisions up to a certain point, actually improves morale, productivity, and outcomes. Do you hold productive meetings? There's an awful lot of talk about meetings, isn't there? There's been, I don't know how many books have been written on how to conduct a good meeting. You go in any of these LinkedIn groups, someone's always posting a discussion about meetings. So I won't get into all those kinds of details, actually, but I will tell you this, because this is all very interesting. PMI did a study many, many years ago. I've been a member of the Project Management Institute since August of 1990, which is when I earned my PMP. I'm number 431. And in studying for my PMP exam, there was some monograph that I read and talked about a PMI study. So we're going back a long way. But you tell me if this isn't still the case. And what the study showed about meetings was that they did a survey. And the survey showed that when an individual was called to a meeting, they had to attend a meeting, they found that meeting to be almost worthless. They said, no, that's not very productive. However, when they called the meeting, they believed that their meeting was highly productive. I just get such a kick out of that. We think our own meeting, the meetings that we call, we think they're really productive, but most of the people sitting there don't find them productive. Unless they call a meeting, then they think it's productive. So think of it this way. In your meetings, do you have dynamics such as one individual just dominates the meeting all the time? They just talk over everybody and they just sit there and pontificate all the time. Do you have meetings that go on and on, seemingly endlessly? Are you really strict with your meeting times? Are people, for example, rolling their eyes by the time lunch comes in because they're just exhausted from sitting there? So I think there are a number of things obviously we can do and I can do. I'm always looking to hold better meetings. So not to say that I want people to want to come to the meetings, but I would rather that they not look at my meetings as torture sessions, if you will. Do you support the escalation process? Every project and program has an escalation process, doesn't it? I mean, there's certain things we run into, problems and issues, people, that we can't solve on our own. Your team members can't solve on their own, and maybe you as a project manager can't solve on your own either. So you have to escalate that. You try not to do it, of course, but there's a reason to have an escalation process because sometimes you need it. So do the people on your team know if there's a problem, how to escalate it? Are they afraid to escalate it? There are some people, especially younger folks I've noticed, they're afraid to escalate things because they don't want to be seen as if they don't know something. They want to be seen as having all the information, having all the knowledge. So they're afraid to do that because it would reveal in some way that they're not knowledgeable, which is very, very dangerous. Other people don't escalate things because, they're hard-headed. They're independent. They're like, I'm going to solve this if it takes me 3 weeks. They're just challenged by these things, and they want to get it done on their own because that's just who they are. However, that's not a good thing to do. You appreciate someone who has that streak of I can do it, but at the same time, if they escalated the issue, it could get solved more quickly. So we want to make sure that people understand when to escalate a problem, to whom that problem should be escalated, and that there won't be any negative consequences to them, basically if they do it, that they're learning as they're going. Every minute that is spent mulling over problems, trying to fight through them, not escalating, that means that decisions are getting delayed. That's what that means. And you can't afford to have that happen. And finally, do you quickly execute change? Change is, and I'm talking about project change in this case, not necessarily organizational change, although that's certainly evident on a lot of projects too, of course. But, project change is inevitable. You get change in a client routine or a project approach or something. How quickly can we make that happen? How quickly can we decide? Can we analyze our situation? Can we assess what the impacts are going to be? Can we make the decision to move forward or not? How quickly we do that is really going to be important to us as we move through our project life cycle. And so having a very clear and expressly written change control process where everybody understands this is certainly an extremely important factor when it comes to decision making. So I hope this gives you some good ideas, but before I wrap up and give you some final recommendations, I'd like to talk about something that some of you might have heard about, don't know. It's called the law of first knowledge. Basically is what comes first is true. It takes evidence to change and lots of it, and believing is seeing. Now some of you might be thinking, what on earth is LeRoy talking about? So let me give you an example of this. So law of first knowledge, we have a family goes off, a family of cave people, they go off on a hunt. Unfortunately, Grandma is eaten by a tiger. So what did this family learn real quickly? Always hunt with the elderly. That's pretty good. Always run faster than Grandma. And they certainly learned that tigers are bad. So this is the law of first knowledge in this case. Tigers are bad. Well, they're bad if they eat your grandmother, I guess, but are tigers really bad? So in some ways, it's a personal opinion. How would you convince this family that tigers aren't bad? Well, that might be difficult. But we do have to overcome the law of first knowledge. So how this works on projects is like this. Let's say you're making or presenting decisions, or you're talking to people about the decisions you make, and you have to make sure that they're on board with it. Let's take the software world, for example. Let's say that this team has been coding software using a very specific programming language for 10 years. And on your project, they're not going to be programming in that language. So they need to change to something else. Now that's a lot of change. And we have to make sure that they come along with us rather quickly in order to get the job done. So it's going to take a lot for them to change. If they've been on projects that have been co-located and now they're in a virtual environment, then that's going to actually introduce more difficulties in changing because people aren't together. So what we need to do is we need to build a case for our decisions so people can accept them faster. Just because we say something doesn't make it true. Simply because we say something is not going to make people want to do it. So I think it's very helpful to explain our rationale, build a case for the decisions. Hopefully people come on board, and if they don't, then you have to take stronger action. But I think it's always a good idea to start with that approach first. So I'm going to end my prepared remarks here by giving you 5 things that you can do to speed up decision making right away. These aren't the only 5, believe me, but these are 5 that I've come to realize that if I can get these down, then we can really move things along much faster on our project. And the first one is to put real choices on the table. Now, what do I mean by this? I think if you're, let's say you're analyzing a particular approach, and I think you don't walk in and tell somebody, your boss or your project sponsor or the governance structure, the governance committee, you don't say, we should do A. I think what we want to say we have three alternatives. We can do A, we can do B, and we can do C. And if you think A is the right one, then give all the reasons for it. As I said, build your case for the decision right away. What this will do is this will give people the understanding that you've done your homework. You've done the analysis. So if you just walk in and say A, then people are going to sit back and say, well, LeRoy, have you tried this? Have you tried that? You're going to get wrapped up in all of these discussions, whereas if you walk in and you say, look, I've looked at A, I've looked at B, I've looked at C, here are the pluses, here are the minuses, this is where we're going to go with this. Now are there any questions? You've actually shortcutted, haven't you, that discussion. And you want to make sure that what you're putting forth to people are actually real. You're not dreaming things up just for the sake of making it seem as if you've done a lot of good work. I think that's critical. Oh, because if I just jump back here for a second, I can remember many years ago in my career, I worked with a very seasoned guy who was very, very pragmatic. And we had a person on our team who said, as we were preparing for a major meeting in which the governance committee had to make a key decision, this person said, well, why don't we just add this and it'll make it look like we've done our homework. And he said, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not just going to put something in there just to make it look like we've done something. We're going to put real choices on the table for these people, and then we're going to have a much better discussion. So that's where I got that. I've been living by that rule for actually quite a long time. Think of your meetings. There are many, many different kinds of meetings that we have. If you want to speed up decisions, you have to have decision-making meetings where you're focusing on decisions, not discussions. Most meetings have three components. Think about this. See if it's not true in your circumstance. Three components: information sharing, discussions, and decisions. Right? Most people spend 90% of the time of the meeting on the first two, don't they? And then, as the clock is ticking down toward the hour and there are other people standing outside wanting the conference room, then in 5 minutes people are supposed to make the decision. That's not a good way to make decisions, is it? No. If we do the sharing and discussions beforehand, which means people have to read something, which can be very difficult for people to do because they'll claim they don't have time. But if we can get them the information beforehand and have some level of discussion, even if it's just through email or whatever, then when they come to the meeting, we can spend more time making the decision and less time talking about it. We don't want to get into a meeting and say, should we go downtown? Should we go crosstown? Should we go uptown? And why should we go downtown versus why? No, we want to say, look, here are three choices. I've looked at this. My vote is uptown, better place to go in New York City. And then once we make the decision, don't let people leave the meeting rolling their eyes. And if you hear of dissension in the ranks, because this happens all the time, people will sit there and nod in agreement, and as soon as they walk out of the meeting, someone calls somebody or they'll go visit them in an office and they'll say, well, I didn't really agree with that. I don't know why Khalid said this because I don't really, but if you hear that, you have to come down hard on that person. And I mean hard. You need to tell that person, if you have a beef, if you have a problem, you need to bring it up in the meeting or keep your mouth shut later. That's how we're going to run this project. And you have to train people in some cases to be honest. So we need to make sure that the decisions stick. There's something in decision making called soft decisions. I know I lived with this for many, many years in a former company I worked in. You're in a meeting, you make a decision. You come back in the meeting a month later and somebody brings up that decision again for conversation and discussion. And then you talk about it again ad nauseum, then another decision is made, so you backtrack on your first decision, and guess what? A month has gone by. That's called a soft decision. No soft decisions. Put that on the whiteboard in your next meeting, or your first slide of your PowerPoint presentation. Use risk management. Use risk management as a backdrop to all of your MVWA activities. If you do this, you'll build a very strong culture of risk management, you'll get everyone thinking about the future, because that's where you're going. Try to establish as lean a governance structure as you possibly can. Cut out the red tape, as they say. Now, I acknowledge that you might not have much control over the things above you, but you have total control over how you allow your team to make decisions. Don't bind them in red tape with processes and procedures that are unnecessary. You're the commander. Think of it this way. You're the commander. Make sure these folks understand your intent and turn them loose to get the job done. And then finally, I would say take some time. Take some time with your team to think about your project's leading indicator. We have a lot of lagging indicators in the project management business, more than we need, quite frankly. Leading indicators are where you're going. That's the future of your project. Don't get stuck in the past. I don't know one person who can change the past. Do you? I know a lot of people who would like to change their past, but unfortunately, we don't have that option. Well, it has been my pleasure to address you today. At Ward Associates, we like to say projects matter and insight helps. And we bring insight to all of our engagements, at least I'd like to think that we do. There's all my contact info. Please feel free to reach out to me through Gmail. I have a website. I have with a blog on there. My current blog post, by the way, is 6 steps for developing a governance structure for strategic portfolio management, which you might find interesting if you're in that business. I'm on LinkedIn, and you can follow me on Twitter. So there's all kinds of ways that you can get to me. So I want to wish you all the best. Thanks so much. Ali, let me turn it back to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Ward. Folks, we are open for the Q&A now. If you have any questions, you could put it in the question box, or you could raise your hand. There's a hand icon available on your webinar console on the right side. If you click on it, I shall give you an opportunity to speak, Mr. Ward, also. But let me go straight to the question box. There's a question already posted from Mr. Arthur Richard. The question is, if you use a governance structure that pushes decisions down to the lowest possible level, where will accountability sit? Do we focus on results alone, or is there a moment of accountability for the results?
Yeah, certainly that's a great question. And I would like to clarify a bit, Mr. Richards, that pushing it down to the lowest level it is a relative term, if you will. It doesn't always mean the lowest person in the organization, if you know what I mean. The lowest level where the decision can be made. The accountability, in my view, always rests with the project manager. I mean, that's our job. So we have to make sure that as we're pushing our decisions down, that we know that we have the right people with the right skills and the right judgment to make those decisions. Not to say that people will not make the wrong decisions. Of course they will. But that's how, certainly that's how I learned. I'm sure that's how you learned coming up through the ranks in your field. So we have to keep an eye on people. And, we have to have a good sense of who these people are. And so if I know I'm going to allow a certain person to make a decision, I'm going to follow up with that person, see how it goes, see, what their assessment is of their own decision. So it's not just let them go and forget about them. I didn't want to convey that at all. But follow-up certainly is helpful. And remember, I did in my decision framework say we want to monitor how that decision actually took place. But accountability, always at the project manager level.
Well, so far we had only one question. Folks, any other questions you have, please feel free to put the questions or raise your hand. Apparently, we had only one question so far, which Ward has already replied. Otherwise, you can always reach him on the contact details, which has been illustrated on this page right now, which you can see. Okay, we have another one from Mr. Venerando Capunitan. The question is, with regards to the put real choices on the table, who normally is identifying these real choices?
Yeah, that's certainly a very interesting question. The real choice is the way. Well, let me tell you the way that I was describing that, because they're very personal to me, and the way that I operate on a project, and as a manager generally, actually, and that is, let's say that I have to make a decision. A matter has come before me, someone has brought it to me, or I've uncovered it myself, and I have to make a decision. And let's say this is going to be a key decision, not just something that I'm doing day in and day out. So I have to figure out, well, how am I going to address this? There are many alternatives, usually, that one can think of as a way to solve a problem, aren't there? And depending upon the unique situation you're in, one might be better and probably will be better than the other. In some cases, you really don't know that until you make the decision. But as I identify my alternatives for making this decision, I have to see, well, which one are the real ones? Someone could say, well, LeRoy, let's try this. And I'll say, okay, well, that's interesting, but that's not really real. I mean, we really wouldn't do that for these reasons. So that's not really a real choice. Let's think about how we would really solve this problem, given our resources, given our culture, given our client, all of the factors that play into this. I would then identify those real alternatives, and then if I had to escalate that, those are the alternatives, those are the choices that I would put forth to my sponsor, my project sponsor, to my client, and I would say, these are the real choices that we can make here. These are the three things that we can do. I have elected to do this number one. This is the reason why I think this is the best choice under the circumstances. These are also real, but I feel that for various reasons, these wouldn't be as effective as the one that I have chosen. Those are real choices. I might have had 5 other alternatives that those really aren't real because I would need 3 times the money to do it, and let's be realistic. We're not going to have that kind of resources to do that particular, do it in that particular way. So that's how I look at real choices.
Okay, we have another one from Brother Ahmed Amin. The question is, how we can take decisions in fraught climates? It's fraught.
Fraught, in a fraught climate. Yes, a fraught climate. Well, a lot of the climate in which we work as a project manager is a fraught climate, isn't it? I mean, as soon as we begin our projects, all of a sudden things start popping up all over the place, and we have to make decisions actually quite quickly. Well, and what happens is, with a number of people, because it's a fraught climate, because there's a lot of tension and people get nervous, that's when it slows down. So that's when people go on this massive search for all of this information, and they have meeting after meeting, and they come up with all these alternatives and spreadsheets and matrices. I think the thing is, we have to boil it down to what's the real problem that we're trying to solve, who can solve it with us, what are the real decisions that we need to make, do we have enough data to make that decision, and then we just have to basically go with it. So a fraught climate is a tough climate, but in fact, that's essentially the kind of work basically that we do. So we have to get good at finding the right information quickly and not being afraid to make the decision, and to use our tools and techniques, and to use other people to help us out.
Okay, that really brings us towards the end of the webinar. If you have any questions, okay, we have one last question. Let me read it over also from Mr. Imtiaz Kochwal. The question is, if you escalate an issue to someone's manager, is there a risk you may affect the relationship with that person?
Well, yeah, I would think so. I mean, I think there's always a risk in doing these kinds of things. So I think one has to be very judicious in which particular issues to escalate. The ones that are usually the most difficult ones to escalate have to do with personnel issues, don't they? I mean, some issues to do with the work itself, those can tend to be a little bit easier. When it comes to personnel issues, well, then that can be more difficult. So that's why I think through experience we begin to learn which ones we should make every attempt to solve on our own, and only if, for example, that is affecting the cost of the project, the schedule of the project, the scope of the project, things that are really going to make an impact on the outcome, then we have to escalate it, being as objective as we can in our presentation to make sure that the project itself is not put into jeopardy.
Okay, we have another one from Bipin Bahari. The question is, rather it's an observation, should the project stakeholders agree to provide delegated authority to the PM at the project start? I see this as a major problem as the PM is without any delegated authority.
Well, I think in an ideal situation, we hire project managers because we think they can do the job. We hire project managers because of their experience and their skills and their business knowledge. I guess it's sort of odd as to why we wouldn't allow the project manager to make the decisions, if you know what I mean, to delegate a certain level of authority to the project manager to actually make those decisions. So my answer coming from, I'm a project manager. Wait a minute, I'm a project manager's project manager. I'm all for project manager. So if I'm assigned to a project, I want a delegation of authority. I don't have to want to run back to some committee all the time to make a decision. So I think what's critical is at the outset, and you learn this in the basic project management 101, that the delegation of authority should be clearly described in the project charter. Now that's an ideal world. Oftentimes projects don't have real charters, but that doesn't mean that the project manager through the project sponsor can't engage the committee or the stakeholders in a serious discussion about what we're going to let the project manager do on his or her own versus what that project manager needs to come back to a committee for a decision.
Well, that really brings us towards the end of the webinar. I would like to thank you, Mr. Ward, especially on behalf of Madinah Institute for Leadership and Entrepreneurship and PMI Arabian Gulf Chapter for investing your time and delivering this webinar. We really appreciate it, and we are very thankful to you. And we also would like to thank all of those who participated in this webinar, with a note of apology that we did encounter some technical issues at the beginning, but we were glad that we resolved it and we came over it. So once again, thank you very much, Mr. Ward, and thank you all of those who attended this webinar. I'm going to end this session now, so you all will be automatically dismissed out. You all have a good day, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're calling from. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And just last note regarding the PDUs, please be aware those who have attended this webinar, they will receive an email within the next 24 hours, which will guide you with the instructions how to claim the PDU. For this particular webinar that you have attended. And if you have not received an email, please send us a note at webinar@mile.org. Again, webinar@mile.org. But rest assured, all
Madinah Institute for Leadership and Entrepreneurship, MILE.